So we are going to start doubling our wefts. I have already cut the little ties off of them, and we just need to unravel them. I have not set up the machine as of yet in order to do so. So as you can see, it's still on 0, 0, and 0, and 2.5. I have learned I cannot use a universal stitch width and position for every bundle or different types of bundles. My raw hair has thinner bundles, so I have to bring the stitch in some. I do use a zigzag stitch. I also don't want to use up a bunch of thread just doubling my wefts, because they're going to be sewed down to the cap as well, so that'll secure them as well. But I do want to use enough to where it's not going to unravel while I am cutting my wefts for each row. So we have unraveled them and folded them in half. As you can see, these are 2 pieces. But let's talk about the setup of my machine. So I first need to change it to a zigzag. And so you would take a look on this little panel here, and number 4 is the actual pattern that I want. And so it defaults to a 1.4 and 3.5. I actually take it to 2. I take that bottom, which is total stitches. I always typically leave that at about a 7. I don't really change that. I personally just find that a 7 works for me. That is my preference, and that's what works for me. And the 2 I think works really well. I drop down to 1.8. Actually, I take this up to 2.5. 2.5 is what I use. And I drop down to about a 1.8 at the beginning and end of each stitches. That I will show you when we are actually stitching on the cap, when I bring it down to a smaller stitch or a smaller position. But I typically keep it at a number 7. So let me show you guys the wefts. So the wefts are a little thicker on this than my raw hair. It's like it's already double wefted, which it is. But then I, of course, double it again. So try and straighten out the end, because the end usually is pretty crinkled up. And I will match them up and lay them one on top of each other. I will use a straight pin to hold them together while I stitch. I learned that helps me keep it in place. Like I said, that is my preference. Actually, I need to flip this the other way because of the way I feed it through the machine. And I'll show you guys in a second how I pin it. So I'm gonna use my straight pin to pin it. And I'll show you guys it with the pin in a second. Because it is a straight pin, it's not going to bother my machine. I typically don't hit that with the needle. And so the wefts are one on top of each other. I know it's probably really hard to see. There you go. it's one on top of each other, but they're kind of next to each other more or less, so it's still a really flat weft. We're gonna put this under the machine here. I'll show you guys how we do that. Now, I learned to use my finger to keep it where I need it to be. So I stretch my weft out, make sure there's no hair where it's not supposed to be, where it'll get caught while I'm double wefting. And I use this little notch on the sewing machine as my guide. And so I'll also use my finger there as my guide as well. I usually start a little in front of where the weft starts, because if not, it tends to bunch up on me. My foot is not spring loaded, so I am actually used to machines where the foot is spring loaded and it'll have some give when thicker material is going through it. Oh, I need to put my feet back up as well. And so that's why I really had to learn how this machine reacted to things, and you know, how to get it from gathering. So we are going to put our finger here. As you can see, my weft is also right up against my finger. Give you guys a better view. Move the hair out the way so you guys can see from this side. And I'm okay, I don't need to hold it. Just need to bring it up on the desk so it's not pulling. And I move pretty slowly, because slow and steady wins the race. And that was my chair, if you guys heard that. So we are going to let it start, make sure it's pulling through and it's hitting both the wefts. Oh, it didn't bind up. Oh, it's bound. So it bound up. It did get bound. Bind it up. Let me see what's going on. It'll throw this error, and so I will have to see why it got bound up. And so I will lift my foot. You can lift the needle this way with this, or you can press the button and lift the needle. And we'll pull this from under here to see what's going on. So what happened was my bobbin thread got bound up. I usually run my shirt through, my test shirt. So let's do that. I should have done that first. So I'm just gonna cut this. There is a thread cutter on here, but I can, I just use the scissors to cut it. So when I first put a bobbin in, I will typically just use a shirt that I use to test, make sure my tension is right and everything's pulled through correctly. It doesn't just go back, you just press a button and it'll go back. And I'll just run this shirt through real quick to make sure everything's going through fine. I'll even go backwards, and this is the reverse button. It's not a bad idea to practice on a shirt or a piece of fabric. I just kind of jumped out there and started on the wigs. I wasn't too worried about it. So we ran the shirt through and it was fine. Those are our stitches there. I missed it. I was probably moving too fast. Happens every now and again. My tension on the back looks good. So I am ready to start again. And I know I do that typically. I don't skip that step. I make sure that I test the new bobbin. So we are going to start again. I'm not worried about the thread. Actually, I'm gonna take that out. I'm gonna cut the bead up thread. So as you can see, it's not pretty. So it's pretty in the front, but not in the back. So we're just gonna cut that off. As you can see, I'm going to use my finger on this side. I'm actually gonna put you guys right in between so you guys can see. So I'm going to line this up. I use my finger. Well, first we get it. And I still use my finger to make sure it's lined up before I put the foot down. And find my foot. We should be able to work right through. Binding up. Let's figure this out. So as you can see, I line it up. Use my finger to line it up. And I do go past, I don't start right at the beginning of the weft. Go ahead and put your foot down. And I start slowly but surely. So I want to make sure it's hitting both wefts. And I usually will just hold my finger here and make sure that both wefts are right on top of each other. And I usually will backstitch. I usually backstitch a little before then, just to make sure I close up the beginning. So it'll be pretty secure. And there you go. Like I said, this does not have a spring-loaded foot, so I try to be very careful to make sure that this is gonna, I usually lift my foot just a little bit. I lift my needle up, lift my foot and push it back just a little, because the thread gets thick. Not a lot, because the thread is still in there, but the thread gets really thick at the ends when I'm double stitching. And we'll just push a little bit through just to make sure it's getting through. And there you go. We are double wefting. So I'll show you guys. I can speed up just a little more. And like you can see, I keep my fingers here. This one holds those together, and the other one keeps me in place. And I usually will stop, check, make sure it looks the way I want it to look. So I'm a little far over. It's just catching right on the outside of this weft, so I'll let it come over just a smidge. Just a smidge. Yep, and I can actually hear it pierce the weft, so I know we're good. But I'll keep my finger here. You just want to make sure Your wefts stay close. I'll slow up when I have to bring the hair up, move the hair out the way, or I'll stop. Make sure my weft is flat. I don't move this finger much because I always want to stay where I'm supposed to be. This slit though here is a great guide for me. And you can hear it pierce the weft. I pierce my weft. Some people don't. I have not had any issues. No excessive shedding. None of that. Stop, take a look, make sure it looks good. It does, and we can continue. And not all wefts are the same, so you'll have to kind of learn, you know, when you have to have a shorter stitch or when you need a closer stitch. So those are things that you'll have to learn because it all depends on the hair. Just gonna straighten this up. And the hair typically pulls through and out of my way. Looks like that weft was not as close as I wanted it to be, but it's still together, so we're not going to worry about it. We've moved over a little. So I would suggest going slow and steady, taking a look at it every, you know, few stitches to make sure you're still in the right place. I am. Yep, I'm still good. And like I said, you just want them to be together. You just want to make sure they're not going to unravel when you cut them as you're sewing. So you want to make sure it's grabbing both, it's hitting both wefts. Move the hair, Victoria. Here, so we go. There it is. I'll make sure we get just in so flat, and we'll back stitch over as well. So my last stitch typically is outside of the weft, which is fine. Typically I'll just cut, thread, because I can hear when it is not on there. So here is a part of the double weft. Let me take this needle out that keeps stabbing me. So that's the beginning. I could go back over that. Not too worried about it. I'll make sure I go over it again when I install on the cap. I'm trying to get it to focus for you guys so you can see. There you go. So that's what it looks like. As you can see, sometimes it'll come down a little far, but it's still catching the weft, so I'm not too worried about it. But that is double wefted. So I will double weft the second one, and we will be ready to get sewing on the cap.